Welcome to Diverse Happy Hour. My name is Jake. This is Duncan Trussell,
Hi.
co-creator of the Midnight Gospel, host of Duncan Trussell Family Hour, and a great comedian. And I'm really excited to have him on the show to talk about everything. Duncan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing really good, man. I'm excited that this is actually working. If you saw what I had to, what my tripod situation here, it's embarrassment. It's stacked on a light, and it's sort of any second the whole thing could fall apart. But that's, I guess, the world.
I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed off screen, just so we're good. So I wanted to ask about this, and we've got people asking already. I think, though, to jump ahead to the last episode of Midnight Gospel, which was just so incredible, so powerful, and I know that you used recordings that were pretty old because your mom has passed away. I'm curious, what was it about those recordings that you felt like needed to become an episode, and what was it like turning them into an episode and editing them together?
Well, with that, there's two podcasts that I did with my mom. That I think it was probably a year in between both of them, and so one of them, she was still fighting cancer, and the prognosis was bad from the beginning, and then but still, she was living longer than they expected her to, and she was actually at some points there were these like moments where the tumor counts were dropping, the tumor markers and stuff, and it was like, it's just, that's how cancer works. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hold on one second, my friend. I'm gonna have,
No
this is gonna be really annoying. I mean, I'm telling you, I have like really bad luck with Instagram. That's all my fault.
It happens.
Okay. Okay, so anyway, it was really hard. The short answer is it was really fucking hard to do that, because I only listened to those podcasts a few times, and one of the times I listened to them was when I found out my wife was pregnant, and I wanted her to meet my mom, and we just lay in bed watching it, crying. And so when I knew Pendleton, both of us wanted to use it, and so I went to Drinks up the street from Titmouse with Pendleton to talk about how we were going to do it, and just started pounding tequila and crying and telling him, listen, man, I'm still grieving my mom. If I'm in this Titmouse too much during day-to-day, the process, I don't know that I'm going to create the kind of environment that people are going to be able to work within and not feel kind of uncomfortable. Because, when you're making animation, you've always got to make really hard cuts no matter what. Like certain things, you just have to. There's no way to keep it all in there, and that's brutal.
Oh, got a little buffer.
Sorry, I'm back.
Okay, you're back.
There?
Don't worry about it. I'm here.
Sorry, everyone. That's brutal for creators, but man, it's really brutal for the animators, because they'll spend a week on something that suddenly just doesn't make it in the show.
Oh yeah.
Well, anyway, we came up with a way that I would be not coming in during the production part of that episode, and I gave him ideas and symbols that I wanted to use, but essentially I stepped back a little bit for that one, because I didn't want to inhibit the process, and I didn't want people to feel afraid to say anything for fear they might offend the midlife crisis guy.
Totally. If you're just joining us, please put your questions in the comments for Duncan Trussell, and I'll try to get through as many as I can. We have one which I think I know the answer. Someone wants to know why Pendleton for the animation. I know you guys have been sort of talking about this for a long time. I guess maybe to spin it a bit, what is it about Pendleton's style of animation that appeals to you so much and you think works well with your interview style?
Oh man, well, I mean, it wasn't like I chose Pendleton.
He chose you.
Yeah, he chose me. Yeah, I mean, I would love it if I were that powerful, that I had an assortment of great animators that I had sort of one morning woken up and been like, I think it's time to make a show around my podcast, but that is just not how it happened. Pendleton was listening to my podcast in the early days, and he reached out to me because he had a idea, like the seed of an idea that grew into Midnight Gospel. And that, that first conversation with him happened over coffee. And then at the end of that, he told me that he didn't have time to make the show. And then it was years later that he reached out again and said, let's work on it for real.
Cool. Very cool. We got a lot of questions about season 2. I don't know if you can tell us anything, if there's going to be a season 2. Have you heard anything from Netflix about the success of the show, whether people are watching
They're super excited about the reception it's getting. This is a Midnight Gospel I don't think it's like any other show.
Definitely not.
So, and Netflix is Netflix. I understand they're like, we don't know about season 2 yet. Either way, and they're masters of not indicating anything one way or the other. And I get it, because if they kind of hint at you that there's going to be another season, then you might make, that's going to trigger a whole bunch of shit. But then on the other hand, if they indicate that maybe they're not, they're just really good at maintaining a kind of neutrality regarding it, and so, but I would love, there's so much more in that world, and we just barely scratched the surface of it. So I would love to make 1 million more episodes of Midnight Gospel, because we only covered the very, very basic world, and we didn't really get into some of the other stuff that's going on in the ribbon, which to me is really, really exciting. I really want to tell that story.
Yeah, that world you created is the ribbon, very interesting. You had like a little bits and pieces, his dad dying in some war.
The Sector Wars.
The Sector Wars. How did you come up with that stuff? Like, what's the process of creating the world that you then use to tell Midnight Gospel?
I'm a big fan of the idea that you sort of, whether it's real or not, who cares? But, in the beginning of Greek writing, they would do this invocation to the muse. And there was this beautiful concept, which is like, I'm not writing this at all. I've become more than anything a kind of scribe, that's taking notes that are being given to me from some alternate realm. Okay. So I think that allowing yourself, regardless of the absurdity of what I just said, to enter into those states of consciousness without any sense of like, oh no, I'm actually channeling another dimension. For me, that helps me, right? And so I looked at it more along the lines of receiving a signal from a place, and then as best I could trying to, put down all the aspects of the place. And also, we made a decision up front that even though we had fleshed out the world in such a deep way, like one very small example of it would be, there's an insult on the ribbon where people call each other tart bakers. And yeah. And that sounds like we just made up an insult, but that came from the religion of the progenitor. And in that mythology, much the same thing that happened to Buddha happened to the progenitor, which is that he ate a tart that was poisoned. And so there's a being called the tart baker, which I guess you could say is the equivalent of like Judas or something on the ribbon. That's just one little example of it.
That's amazing.
That every word in there has a connection to a deep history in a big world. We didn't just we made up words,
sure,
but we didn't just like arbitrarily throw sci-fi sounding words in there. They all are connected to something.
Very cool. A couple people have been asking, sort of season 2 adjacent, are there any podcast interviews you've done that you feel like you would love to turn into episodes in the future?
Yes, there are. There are a few I can think of. Yeah, there are a lot. There's a lot, and I think that that consideration of what I think now that we know how to do it, and we sort of figured out this process for making it, there's a lot of other angles, we would like to explore as far as using podcasts, using a narrative form, experimenting with going in and out like we did in episode 106 with David Nichtern. It's a little more narrative.
Yeah.
But, there's so many ways to play around with the medium that, we only had 8 episodes to experiment with. So there's not only are there like episodes in the bank that I would like to use, but there's people I would like to talk to and interview who maybe, but before the show came out, I might not have been able to even like get to do the podcast. So I might be able to do that now.
Oh yeah, good point. Totally different question from one of the people watching. Amethyst Jesus wants to know, what do you think is happening in Area 51?
Are you if he's talking about that earthquake that happened in that area?
Was there an earthquake?
Oh yeah, I think it's a 6.3. They felt it all the way to Vegas.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, I think in my old age, I've learned that usually the most, what is it? Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually right. And for me, that means the most boring explanation, right? So probably there was an earthquake that happened. Coincidentally, it was in the area where people are doing all this top secret research. But, I'm a big fan of conspiracy theories, not as fact, but as emergent folklore and at the very least, and or a reflection of the, zeitgeist in a certain way, or a kind of shadow reflection of what happens when people don't have all the data. And, so I have favorite conspiracy theories. One of them being that there are massive subterranean bases all over the planet. And one of them, it happens to be under Area 51, and that they're experimenting with, technologies that are potentially incredibly destructive. And it could be that they were testing some new weapon out there that caused an earthquake. There was a time prior to the existence of nuclear bombs where the idea of splitting the atom was, people thought it was impossible. Then Einstein freaked out, realizing what would happen. And then suddenly, there were probably some earthquakes coming in the early days of atomic testing where people were just like, what the fuck was that? What was that flash? No one knew that we were entering into a completely new era as a civilization. And so I would say that if we're getting an earthquake from a military base, probably it's some boring ass earthquake. But that being said, it wouldn't be that crazy to say, oh yeah, they're probably experimenting with something, or they fucked something up. They pressed the wrong button on a ship they captured, shot a plasma ray that caused an earthquake. Yeah.
Quick follow-up from my producer, Evan. He wants to know, what about those UFO videos that the government released recently?
Okay, here's a cool story I've got about those.
Please.
I was on stage in Arlington, Virginia, at the Arlington Draft House. And I was just, rambling up there. Because, anytime I was staying at Pentagon City. And it's a crazy place to be. Like when you're in LA, you will inevitably see a celebrity or something. But in DC, you're seeing all these people who would be celebrities if people knew how many people they've killed, if people knew, the shit that they've done. So you get this, I was on the train and you look over and it's like definitely a born identity, like a guy who just has that look that he's like, been in Afghanistan, or, you know what I mean? He's been in Kim Jong-un's bathroom and Kim Jong-un didn't know he was there. That level of craziness. There's crazy shit out there. And so I was talking about those UFO videos, and I get a DM on Instagram from someone who was in the audience, and they're like, hey, just, I work in the branch of, I can't remember if it was the Navy or the Air Force. I think it was the Navy. I work in the branch of the Navy that investigates shit like that. We had to investigate it because it was a leak, and we had to look into it. And he's like, we don't know what that is. And because, I think I was up there saying what most people were saying is like, oh, that's an experimental drone or something that they're using. There's no way. And again, that's always the right answer. Like the odds of those things being from another galaxy or from another dimension are infinitesimally smaller than it's some terrestrial based technology that people are experimenting. And it would make sense that you would want to, test your own technology with like pilots who don't know what the fuck it is. It makes sense to like just see, can they pick it up on radar? Can they track it? Anyway, that's what I thought. And this guy he said, no, we don't know what it is.
Oh, wow.
We have no idea. Just no idea what the hell that is. But people have been seeing them for a long time.
Interesting. Well, that's a little scary. But okay, so
exactly.
I've seen it
be even almost you would rather be like, oh yeah, that's another country's technology, but to not know.
You want the government to know. Yeah.
Why would they say that? It's very top secret. It's not like the guy's going to be like, oh, Duncan, I love your podcast. Let me leak top secret information. That's technology that we've been experimenting with for the last 20 years that is using an element that's disrupting the gravitational field, and it's going to make it so we are going to dominate anybody in battle forever. No, they're going to be like, we don't know what it is.
Yeah. I've seen a few questions about fatherhood. I know you became a father a few years ago. So I wanted to ask you, I was watching an interview you did with Pete Holmes in 2014, where you basically say, like, I want to do everything in life. I want to like sex, drugs, whatever, but no diapers. I'm curious, how has being a father changed your attitude towards life in general?
Well, I right before I ended up, right before I met my wife, I was on the phone with my brother saying, I'm not going to reproduce in this lifetime. And I had a very, what I consider to be a sophisticated take on human reproduction, which was pretty jaded and cynical, and I think a little dim-witted. Like I would call neighborhoods breeding grids, and I just sort of, it's where the people just go and just breed and hatch out babies that they then send to, public schools so they get conditioned to work in factories. It was sort of my take on the whole damn thing. And it's an embarrassing thing. And I think kind of foolish, maybe in sort of a good way, but obviously like the hubris and imagining that like I had a hot take on the reproductive cycle. You know what I mean? Like essentially like trying to elevate myself, creating a really stupid pseudo-intellectual hierarchy where as someone who didn't reproduce, I hadn't succumbed to the forces of brainwashing that anybody who had a kid had succumbed to. Really embarrassing. So then I fell in love with Erin, and all of a sudden I just wanted a baby. I wanted to have a baby with her, and it was more than I wanted to have a baby. There was a feeling of like it sounds so cheesy. It was the same stuff that would make me want to puke when my friend said it, where I knew we were going to have a baby, where it was already like written in the Akashic records, and then everything changed. Now that being said, being a father is very difficult, and your freedom. I used to have like massive amounts of time. I could spend all day playing God of War, doing ketamine, trying to hit up girls on Instagram. And like I'm not going to lie that's like one way to live. It's not that maybe, if I had to choose, I would never choose anything but the being a dad. But, it's, to me, it's sort of it's one of the greatest, if you want to experience truth, what Ram Dass says is sit with dying people. But then also, if you want to experience truth, sit with babies, with people being born. And also, if you want to experience truth, just having a child and sitting on the trampoline with someone who completely depends on you, that is just an angel, a combination elf-angel thing, and then feel your heart break in half when just because he's calling fruit naan, that's what he calls fruit, and he picks it from the tree and eats it, naan. What are you going to do, man? What are you going to do? Your heart gets blown open. So, you know, but, you know, just like any great thing, it's not easy, you know?
Totally. Let me ask a few questions from the audience. And then I know we're going to get to, you know, a performance of some Dune. So I'm excited for that. I want to do a few other things first. Let me just get through a few questions from the audience. So quick question, 2 interview questions. One, this guy, a vampire, just said Joe Rogan season 2, which I think I know what that means. But what do you think, Joe Rogan in season 2 of Midnight Gospel?
You know, that line of thinking regarding who we would use, we haven't really spent too much time with that. Yeah, so the
you want to
answer
get
to
ahead
your
of
question
yourself.
is it's up in the air right now. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I love the conversations I have with Joe, and I think it would make a really cool episode. And I would love to see how Pendleton, what character Pendleton turned Joe into. But you know, who knows?
Totally. And here's one from Game Show Waller. Who would be your dream interview? You mentioned like
Stephen King.
Stephen King. Oh, that is a really good one. You know, I talked to Joe Hill last week, his son, who's awesome.
No way.
Yeah,
cool.
he's a very cool guy. But Stephen King was like, yeah, next level. No offense to Joe Hill, amazing
Joe
guy.
Hill, to me, you know the story. What's so badass about Joe Hill is he knew that if he said he was Stephen King's kid, he would get a book deal. And so he published his first, he published more than one. He published his books under a pseudonym, never even letting the publisher know who he was.
Mm-hmm.
That's a badass. That is a badass to do that. I mean, how crazy is that? And the publisher must have just, how awesome is that to be a publisher and find out you've already been publishing Stephen King's son's knowledge?
Yeah. Definitely, if you are a fan of Joe Hill, you can check that video out on YouTube, on University's YouTube page. So you sent me a few storyboards from the show, and I want to just like put some of them on screen, and because they like blew my mind when I was looking at them.
Cool.
And just get curious if you can explain some of these to me. So I think this one.
These are all. No one's seen these outside.
No one's seen these. I got 2 here, so we're gonna look at them. So. Explain this to me. We're getting sort of a cut-off version. What do you see?
I can open it. Well, okay. I mean, it looks upside down on this side. You would have to figure out a way to shrink that down.
Yeah, I'm having trouble. You know, we'll put this in the when we publish this on our website. We'll have full bleed images so you can look at them. So this is like a sort of. Is this the jail world or what?
Yeah, that was one of the early versions of the jail world. So we were trying to map out what the jail world looked like. And if you could see the whole thing, one of the original ideas for the jail world was that we were going to kind of model it very loosely off of like heaven, limbo, and hell. So underneath the jail world was going to be a hellscape, and above the jail world was going to be a sort of like heaven-like place. And the prisoner's decisions weren't just looping him through the jail world, but were actually initially bringing him down into the hell realms, where then he, was able to move into the realm of the gods. And because in Buddhism, there's this idea that there's all these realms, and but they're all sort of traps. Like as long as you're sort of wrapped up in your identity, you're going to suffer no matter where you're at in the continuum. So that was the complex version of the prison idea, which then gradually just turned into it. We just put it in a prison.
Cool. Yeah, I'm sorry that didn't show up fully. Instagram, they do their own thing. Let's try one more and see how it looks.
Okay.
All right, this is a little better. Dead superheroes. What's is this the President zombie episode, or what is this?
Yeah, that's a animatic from the President zombie episode. And this world actually shows up again a little bit in a promo clip we did where Clancy tries to interview this little robot, and the little robot, Clancy thinks he's cute, and so the little robot is making like robot noises after Clancy asks him to interview him, and Clancy thinks that's cute, so he like imitates the robot in a baby voice, which just this robot, man, he just doesn't, Clancy doesn't understand that this robot is like maybe one of the most powerful beings in the simulator, and that the robot is like kind of pissed at Clancy for his lack of care of the simulator, because it's like one of the last survivors of this world.
Yeah.
You know, because of Clancy not, you know, putting green oil on, we've got all these, every superhero has died. And so then the robot transforms into a gun and like shoots Clancy as he's running into the simulator. But yeah, so this was like the Dead Superheroes is a world. It's a world of where everybody was a superhero, and they all died except for this one little gun creature.
Wow. I'm not sure what, so someone has been asking what was the inspiration for the episode Officers and Wolves. Which one is that? Do you remember?
Officers and Wolves, don't ask me.
Yeah.
You know, we used an AI to name every episode.
Really?
So, yeah. So, I don't know.
Which one is Officers and Wolves? I'm looking it up real quick. It's my favorite, Baby Clowns.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. The inspiration for the clown episode, I was in a visionary state on ketamine. And I saw this vision of a city filled with these clear tubes that were filled with meat. And the meat was used as some kind of power. I guess some combination of, it's like, I guess, water that's generating energy, you know, it's like a hydroelectric situation, but with meat, you know, a meat electric situation. And then also in this vision, I saw these weird beings that were watching the meat flow through the tubes, and they loved watching it. Like in the way people like to watch the ocean here, they liked that. It was almost, they're like, if you had a meat tube running in front of your apartment, that made you high status, you know, because you had a view of the flowing meat. But then after I saw that, I started thinking about like, whoa, what would happen if the meat stopped flowing and it would all rot? Like somehow the meat flowing through the tubes generates the coolant, cools it down, then it would start rotting. And then if it started rotting, the city would collapse, but it would be such a stinky collapse because all that meat would start rotting, and then the meat would draw giant flies, and then there would probably be some kind of war with the flies who wanted to lay their eggs in the meat and the people who lived in that city. And so that was the inspiration for that episode.
Wow. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I think sort of brings me to another question, because I thought that one had a really great musical break. I know that you did a lot of the music for the show.
I did the credit songs and a few songs in there, but Joe Wong did the majority of the music.
Got it. Well, what was it like sort of putting your own music into Midnight Gospel?
Scary. And I wouldn't have done it if not for Pendleton, who encouraged me to do it. But I you know, because when I was making the music because I do songs on my podcast. And so Clancy would have made songs too. And so, but there was a piece of me that's like, I don't want to do that thing, you know, where I'm like trying to jam my music into the, you know, I didn't want to do that.
Sure.
But Pendleton really believed in it, in the idea of it. And I really creatively trust him. So, I would work on a song for a long time. And then I'd play it for him and be like, oh man, I know this is, I don't know, we should maybe get Joe to work on it. And he'd be like, no, this is fine. We'll just do it just like this. And it was cool. So that's what it was like to put music in there.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're already way over time, but I want to just do a couple more things. Thanks for sticking with me. I know a few technical difficulties. We got it rolling. So I want to give you some quick rapid fire questions. I call this the post-apocalyptic lightning round. So just whatever comes to mind first. First question. If you could help colonize Mars, but it meant you couldn't come back to Earth, would you do it?
No.
No. Yeah, right answer. All right. If a zombie apocalypse broke out, where would you go to try to survive?
I think the problem is that isn't that how you die, is by going somewhere? Like in all the zombie apocalypses, it's the escape where you die. I mean, but not to say that you're going to be okay, but I've got a compound here. I think I would probably just stick around here. What are you going to do? Get in gridlock traffic as everyone tries to flee LA? And what do we got here? Do we have this? And it's a pertinent question or clarification. Do we have slow moving zombies, old school, or do we have that new evolved football player zombies that can run at 15 miles per hour? These are all going to inform my decision about whether or not to flee.
True, but if you're in LA or in New York like me, you're probably just done. It's over, right? Like if you're in a city,
you're done.
If the singularity happened and humans could upload their brains to computers and live forever, would you do it?
I don't want to be a singularity nerd, but I'm going to say when the singularity happens, it's going to be an irrelevant thing. Because from the little bits I've read on it, when the singularity represents this, what Teilhard de Chardin describes as maximum harmony, maximum complexity, what Terence McKenna talks about as potentially the invention of a time machine, that a time machine can't exist prior to itself. So what you're looking at is really a time machine is a portal to all points in the future throughout the entire multiverse. It's essentially opening up a kind of temporal, like breaking open a temporal dam through which an infinite number of people from the future will begin expressing themselves at that very moment, which will produce a kind of like, what Terence McKenna says? I just listened to this. He said, history, you can look at human history as a spider web that we've spun on time. And the singularity, I think, represents the destruction of that spider web, the end of history. So that being said, leading up to the singularity, we can expect to see a few things. There's some predictions that Ray Kurzweil has made regarding processing speed, processing power. And at some point it could be, though I think it's highly doubtful, but maybe it could be that we have figured out a way to not just understand consciousness itself, which is a prerequisite to upload consciousness, but also a methodology through which we can upload our consciousness. But that being said, I think by then we will have redefined our idea of what data is anyway. And the idea that we're going to upload our consciousness anywhere will probably seem a little ridiculous because we'll realize the entire universe is a computer and we're just lines of code within that.
Well, down. Similar question. Are we in a simulation?
Look, I think you got to go to Nick Bostrom for that. He wrote a great essay on it. It's a mathematical, there's probabilities relating to it that, I think he has a firm grasp on that. That being said, the idea of us in a simulation, that's just we're upgrading language right now. So in the past, in Hinduism, one word for reality is Maya, which means illusion. Or if you look at some Gnostic concepts, there's an idea that we are being held within a kind of hyper distracting Skinner box created by a jealous god being called the demiurge. So it's not a new concept. It's any human who's woken up and looked around and still kind of felt like they were in a dream has thought to themselves, is this real at all? And row your boat. That song is simulation theory. Except in this case it's saying life is a dream. But dreams, of course, they are simulations. It's the simulation being run by your neurocomputer. So I think the answer from one angle is most certainly we are in a simulation as long as we are experiencing any kind of separation that is being created by the way we're apprehending reality neurologically.
Yeah. I don't know how to respond to that, but I liked it. All right. Let's get to the reading. If you're still here with us, Duncan is going to do a reading from, I think, the beginning of Dune, which I'm super excited for. Again, welcome to Inverse Happy Hour with Duncan Trussell. We're going to be reading some Dune. Enjoy. If you want to set us up and then jump into it, please.
Okay. So this, for those of you who aren't familiar with Dune, you got to dive in. If somehow you missed it, I like the movie. I would recommend reading the book first. I know that's a hot take. What's happening in this scene is that the protagonist, Paul Atreides, is about to leave his home planet and go to a desert planet called Arrakis, or Dune. And everything in this world is political. Everything in this world is complex, and everything in this world is there's a medieval quality to it. Now, this is a little bit of a spoiler. Put your fingers in your ears. Essentially, what happened is they let computers get too smart in their history, and that caused some kind of catastrophe. And so there's a law, a universal law, that there could be no more thinking computers. So this has produced this beautiful aesthetic of high technology, but not a lot of like computer systems about as we understand them, though they're beings anyway. It's a deep, deep, beautiful world. And Paul Atreides is the son of, I guess you could call it a religion, a matriarchal religion called the Ben Gesserit, or Jesuit. I never know how to pronounce these words. And so their mission, they don't think in terms the way we think right now. They think in terms of like thousands of generations, and they had this huge plan using eugenics essentially to try to create a being that was the Messiah. And there's some question as to whether or not Paul Atreides it could be that very Messiah. And so this is a moment where he is suddenly meeting his mother's teacher, and she is giving him a test to find out if he could possibly be this being.
Sweet.
Hopefully that made sense. And hopefully Dune fans out there aren't pissed if I mess something up. Because this is a religion for some people, this book, and I get it. See, now this is like Jessica, his mother's teacher, speaking, and she's like an old crone. See this? She asked. From the folds of her gown, she lifted a green metal cube about 15 centimeters on a side. She turned it, and Paul saw that one side was open, black, and oddly frightening. No light penetrated that open blackness. Put your right hand in the box, she said. Fear shot through Paul. He started to back away, but the old woman said, "Is this how you obey your mother?" He looked up into her bird-bright eyes, slowly feeling the compulsions, and unable to inhibit them, Paul put his hand into the box. He felt first a sense of cold as the blackness closed around his hand, then slick metal against his fingers, and a prickling as though his hands were asleep. A predatory look filled the old woman's features. She lifted her right hand away from the box and poised the hand close to the side of Paul's neck. He saw a glint of metal there and started to turn toward it. "Stop," she snapped, using the voice again. He swung his attention back to her. "I hold at your neck the Gom Jabbar," she said. "The Gom Jabbar, the high-handed enemy. It's a needle with a drop of poison on its tip. Don't pull away or you'll feel that poison." I don't know why I've made her a pirate. Paul tried to swallow in a dry throat. He could not take his attention from the seamed old face, the glistening eyes, the pale gums around silvery metal teeth that flashed as she spoke. "A duke's son must know about poisons," she said. "It's the way of our times, huh? Musky to be poisoned in your drink. Ayumas to be poisoned in your food. The quick ones and the slow ones and the ones in between. Here's a new one for you. The Gom Jabbar. It kills only animals." Pride overcame Paul's fear. "You dare suggest a duke's son is an animal?" he demanded. "Let us say I suggest you may be human," she said. Steady, I warn you, not to try jerking away. I am old, but my hand can drive this needle into your neck before you escape me. Who are you? He whispered. How did you trick my mother into leaving me alone with you? Are you from the Harkonnens? The Harkonnens, bless us, no. Now be silent. A dry finger touched his neck, and he stilled the involuntary urge to leap away. Good, she said. You passed the first test. Now here's the way of the rest of it. If you withdraw your hand from the box, you die. This is the only rule. Keep your hand in the box and live. Withdraw it and die. Paul took a deep breath to still his trembling. If I call out, there'll be servants on you in seconds, and you'll die. Servants will not pass your mother who stands guarded outside the door. Depend on it. Your mother survived this test. Now it's your turn. Be honored. We seldom administrate this to men, children. Curiosity reduced Paul's fear to a manageable level. He heard truth in the old woman's voice, no denying it. If his mother stood guard out there, if this were truly a test, and whatever it was, he knew himself caught in it, trapped by that hand at his neck, the Gom Jabbar. He recalled the response from the litany against fear, as his mother had taught him out of the Ben Gesserit rite. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. He felt calmness return, said, get on with it, old woman. That's
Awesome.
it. I'll leave you hanging. We got to read the rest.
We'll have you back in a month or two to read the next part, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
I would love that.
I would love it too. I think everyone would love it. Thank you so much, Duncan, for joining me on Universe Happy Hour. If you don't follow, I feel like most of you here are fans already, but if you don't follow Duncan on Instagram, check out his podcast, Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Watch Midnight Gospel on Netflix. It's freaking awesome. And yeah, follow Inverse on Instagram for really cool, weird, trippy stuff. Check out the website for Star Wars news, Dune stuff, science, technology. Again, thanks for joining us. And
My
this
pleasure.
episode,
Thanks for having me.
this is all going to be on YouTube later this week, and we'll be back next week on Wednesday night with another episode of Inverse Happy Hour. Have a great night, Duncan, and have a great night, everyone else. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. See you out there.